Nah, it's in the wrong, but mine's already done.
All right, copy that. Graphic organizer, get your outlines out.
Literally all the classes that
For your persuasive speaking. I think the sooner the better. Why don't you talk to me about it?
Yeah, this week has not been my week.
I got about 4 minutes here.
How you doing?
Alright, so your outlines should be out. You should be copying down this graphic organizer.
Wait, on our outline?
No, copy down the graphic organizer on a sheet of notebook. Yep, the 4 bubbles, yep. I do have a stapler. Successes and failures, yeah. One more time? I realize that. Angelo was not able to be with us today or for the rest of the year, so I've told he's in AOC, so I've told Mr. Wilson that we are streaming live for him, so that's why my computer's turned around, so you can see the board.
Oh my gosh, he's watching us?
He might be, I don't know. Let's see.
You know what? You a good one for doing it though.
Well, I do my job. We'll see what happens.
Can you see his face when he joins us?
No, I don't know if you can see his face.
You just see him like falling asleep.
So it says Reconstruction, Congressional, Radical, and Military Reconstruction. They're the same thing, you just might hear them be called 3 different things. Why did Reconstruction end? Success and failures. And we're going to get started here in about 2 minutes. You got 2 minutes.
No.
Hey. Have you heard Tamir's a little bit on edge today?
Yes, for real. I've been on edge all this week. It's been like, you've been making me angry.
Alright, I got a minute before I'm starting.
You got a new TV?
Yeah.
That's my TV.
I got that new TV.
What TV?
Back there.
Come on. Oh, snap.
Oh my god.
Did you watch something on it? What?
Part of my, get
12%.
warm, so you get it.
I hear grinding. Them long-winded breaks. We don't take days off.
No.
We don't eat. We don't drink hot chocolate. We over there thinking.
Who takes days off?
Better got that 12.
I do.
No, I don't know.
I take some days off. I need days off.
I gotta take a test in June.
But you study.
This is not you.
Studying. Yeah.
Just make sure.
That's better.
Content.
My shit's all over here.
They make you take tests.
What? They make me, yeah. Alright.
I've been quiet too. That's a crazy thing.
Hey.
They should be ashamed.
Alright, so just a couple things here before we get started with the notes. The way things have been going, alright, with my other classes, I really don't anticipate us doing the unit reviews until next Thursday when we have our session together, 3B and 4B. It seems like by the time we get through everything else, right, time's just kind of run out on us. So Our unit reviews will probably pick up on next Thursday. All right. I'll have you in groups. I'll have you with units. There's instructions for it. My 3A class, because they had flex, they were able to spend maybe like the first hour of class yesterday. This is counting flex doing it, and so they were able to get it done. So it's going to take us about an hour to get that done, and then we'll go over it. We'll look at some. I have a Kahoot for every single unit. We'll look at past exams, right? So we'll be prepared for that final. In case you want to, and remember the final is June 5th. In case you want to get started early as far as studying and stuff go, this post is going to only grow, right? These are all things for final exam, study guides and whatever. I'm just going to continue to add stuff to this, all right? This big time final exam review packet, it's a Word document. It's about 37 pages long, and it's just straight up information, like in a bullet point form. I haven't really divided it up into like units or sections. It's just like, here's information about Spanish colonization. We can show that. All right, so it's just that, all right, for about 30-something pages. 46, sorry, excuse me. And then the other one is, these are a little bit bigger ideas, and this is in a PowerPoint. All right, so we'll here's the Declaration of Independence, and it's like bullet point. Here are 2 things that you probably have to remember. So this is a little broader, and this is a little bit more specific. One thing that I know for a fact that I'm going to add pretty soon, Khan Academy has a 20-minute tutorial on U.S. history from Jamestown to the Civil War. It's only 20 minutes, so we can't really go too in depth, but I know that some people like Khan Academy. I think that might be a good start, right? You'll probably see this crash course videos. I'll make a YouTube playlist of all the crash course videos for U.S. history, and I'll put those on there so they're in one spot. You'll probably see some released American 1 history final exam questions, right? So if you want to look at that, so you know what it might look like, what sort of questions you might want to, could expect, Farouk, right? Yeah. Okay. You could look at that. So this is only going to grow, but this is a good starting point, I would imagine, right? Okay. Does anybody have, or did anybody have, besides Sydney and Kiana probably, right? Did anybody have any big questions or concerns as far as the outline goes? I think I answered a good deal of them in class, all right? And you were the only class that was able to actually spend a significant amount of time in class working on them. Does anybody still, if you're not able to turn it in, does anybody have any big questions or concerns or reasons why they are not going to be able to turn it in?
Okay, so we're not writing speech then?
Well, I'm only talking about the outline right now.
I know.
All right. Well, we have to have the outline first. That's what I'm looking at steps, Caitlin. Don't get antsy. All right. No. Okay. So, just in case, if you're hesitant, all right, Reconstruction readings, this is the original source and cast of characters, so if you need to look at the actual document or the cast of characters again, if you're not ready to turn it in, there it is. And this is from my 1A class, maybe? I took pictures of it. 1B class, excuse me. Number 2 is not included in there because I ran out of storage space on my phone. I only have a 4 gig phone. And then number 7 is not included because the people decided to sit there and not do anything. So if you look at that Word document, it'll say source number 7 is not included because, and then I list out the students by name and just try to publicly shame them. All right, so that's it. That's what we got going on. As far as Reconstruction today, we want to take some notes on Reconstruction, and then the last 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes, we're going to have a short quiz on Reconstruction. It'll be 10 questions. It'll be multiple choice. It shouldn't be too difficult, right? As long as you're paying attention to use your notes, right, you should be fine. So just a quick recap here, Mr. Bailey, right? Quick recap about where we're at as we're starting to pick up with Reconstruction again. We've left those notes behind for a couple of days, right? So where did we leave off? Well, the Civil War ended in 1865 and the North won, right? I hope that's not a spoiler alert to anybody. And so now we start to address these issues, right? What are we going to do with, these southern states? What are we going to do with the Confederate officials? What are we going to do with the 4.5 million freedmen, right? Who's going to be in charge of this process, so on and so forth. Lincoln says, I want this, this plan for Reconstruction to follow my number one goal since the Civil War, right? I just want the Union to get back together. His number one goal throughout the Civil War was to preserve the Union, to keep the country together. His Reconstruction plan is going to be similar to that. How can I best get the Union back together? Quick and easy, right? Let's bygones be bygones. That 10% plan, if 10% of the voters in 1860, right, signed a loyalty oath, and it was actually like a piece of paper, loyalty oath, denouncing secession, all right, and pledging their allegiance to the Constitution, which now has the 13th Amendment, they could be admitted back into the Union. Under Lincoln's plan, 4 states get in there. Okay. Unfortunately for Lincoln, he gets a bullet in the head. He gets shot and killed by John Wilkes Booth, and Andrew Johnson's coming back as president. Something kind of to mention here before we get into the conflict between Johnson and the Republicans is that Lincoln was a Republican. Lincoln was more liberal than Johnson is. He's not as liberal as these radical Republicans, but he's more liberal than Johnson is. But he was even having problems with these Republicans in Congress. The Republicans felt like he wasn't doing enough. So when he gets killed and Johnson comes in, well, Johnson is going to be even more lenient as far as his approach to Reconstruction. He's going to pardon 13,000 former Confederate officials. He believes that the southern states should be, essentially ruled by white men, right? So he wants to exclude African Americans from the political participation or political activity, right? He's anti-black, you could say, he's racist, whatever. And so that's going to, the problems that Lincoln had, they're only going to be worse under Johnson, right? This time period when Lincoln and Johnson are really setting the requirements for Reconstruction, this is known as presidential Reconstruction, right? And this is all the way up until 1867. And your notes stopped, right, when presidential Reconstruction is going to end, all right? And so we're going to start to shift gears here in a second. Midterm elections happen. All right, November of 1866, these midterm elections happen. Johnson tries to go around and convince people that they need to vote these radical Republicans out of office and vote in maybe Northern Democrats or vote in more moderates. Unfortunately for Johnson, as he's going around making these speeches, his disease of alcoholism, follows him. He gives some speeches and he's drunk a lot of the times. He gets in arguments with the people in the crowd, right? There's race riots that are following him. And these midterm elections actually turn out where the Republicans win a veto-proof majority in both houses of Congress. So that means whatever they pass, Civil Rights Act of 1866, they pass it, Johnson vetoes it, they can override that veto. All right, Freeman Bureau, all right, they pass it, Johnson vetoes it, they're going to override that veto. So now we're ready for a showdown, right? Going into 1867, right, Johnson really doesn't have a lot of power. Congress has all the power. And in Congress, these radical Republicans have a lot of the power. So now we're ready for a showdown. With Reconstruction here, you're going to see this period of time be called 3 different things possibly, but they all mean the same period, all right? You might be here called Radical Reconstruction. Why is it called Radical Reconstruction? Because of radical Republicans. You might hear it be called Congressional Reconstruction. Well, because this is now when Congress is going to be in control. You might also hear it be called Military Reconstruction, and we'll see that here in a second. Caitlin.
I should be taking notes on that picture.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's what the graphic organizer is for. All right, so what does this look like? All right, well, the first thing that they do is
That's not a very good first picture.
Yeah. All right, so the first thing that they do is they look at the South and they say, all right, so right now, all 11 states are technically back in the Union because 4 states came under Lincoln's plan and the other 7 states came under Johnson's plan. So technically, the job of Reconstruction is almost done. But the requirements that were under Johnson's plan is not good enough for the Republicans. So when Congress decides to take control of Reconstruction, they look at these 11 states and say, 10 out of these 11 states, with the exception being Tennessee, right? 10 out of 11 southern states, you guys did not do enough, all right, to be admitted back into the Union. So that means you have to start from scratch. And these 10 states, they're going to be divided up into 5 military districts. This is where the military reconstruction comes in. So congressional reconstruction, the first thing that they do is they divide up the South into 5 military districts, right? The first thing that they do is to divide up the South into 5 military districts. They have a former Union general in charge of each military district. You have Northern troops, right, having a strong presence, right, in these military districts. Essentially, the South is like under martial law. You know, is this the best approach to it? Is this going to cause some backlash, right? Is going to have some blowback and resistance from these white Southerners? Probably, right? Probably. So what are the requirements here? Well, with congressional reconstruction, they have a couple things. Number one, you have to hold these state conventions, right? And in these state conventions, you have to ensure a couple things. Number one, African Americans can participate in the political process. And number two, when you're writing your state constitutions, you have to include the 14th Amendment, which gives African Americans citizenship, all right, and guarantees equal protection under the law. You have to do those two things before you're admitted back into the Union, before these federal troops leave. I'm going to put this right here, just as a reminder. Keep that in the back of your head, all right? 8 out of 11 states do this by 1875. All right, so 8 out of 11 states fulfill these requirements by 1875. Just kind of keep that in the back of your head. We're going to come back to that later, all right? It's like one of those numbers when you add up, you know, you don't want to forget that number, all right? 9 plus 2, right? You carry the 1. You know, just don't forget about that 1 right up there. So what else? What else happens here during radical reconstruction or congressional reconstruction? Well, they passed the 14th Amendment, of course, right, during this time period. And then they have to deal with Johnson, all right? Andrew Johnson's a thorn in their side. Andrew Johnson's not following the game. Andrew Johnson's not listening to the mandate that these these radical Republicans have. They got to get rid of him. So and I'm not a fan of Johnson. I'm not trying to support him, all right? But they set him up, right? They set him up. They want him out, so they're going to try to get him. They're trying to get a plan ready to get him out. They look at Johnson's cabinet, right? Johnson's cabinet members, they were, you know, appointed by Abraham Lincoln, right? Abraham Lincoln wins the 1864 election. He appoints his cabinet members, right? And so they're there. Johnson hates one of his cabinet members, the Secretary of War named Edwin Stanton. He hates him, all right? And so Congress has Johnson where they want him. And so they pass this law. The law is not important to remember or to memorize. It's called the Tenure in Office Act. And what this Tenure in Office Act says is that the president cannot fire any cabinet members during the term, all right? The president cannot fire any cabinet members during the term of the president who appointed them, right? Without the approval from the Senate. So if you think about it, Abraham Lincoln won the 1864 election. So this is Abraham Lincoln's term, right? So Johnson can't fire any of these cabinet members without the approval of the Senate. Johnson fires Edwin Stanton, all right? And so now Congress has Johnson where they want him. He just broke the law, right? The House of Representatives impeached Johnson. When you impeach somebody or a public official, you're just charging them with a crime. You're not kicking them out, right? You're just charging them with a crime. They're charging him with breaking the law and violating the Tenure of Office Act. Then it goes to the Senate, right? And then the Senate holds a trial to determine guilt or innocence, right? It's with the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court if it's the president, and then they decide, is the president going to be kicked out, right? Or is the president going to stay? Johnson was impeached. Clinton was impeached. Johnson does not get kicked out by 1 vote. Who did that?
Hey, I was just opening your door to let you get some air.
I appreciate that. Johnson misses getting kicked out by 1 vote. All right, by 1 vote. I'm sorry. It's kind of fun.
Don't take it off.
Why?
Cuz that's a gorgeous song.
To you it is.
Why is it not to
You
you?
can have it.
I will gladly take it.
I don't think
Yeah,
it's
burn it.
So
Nah, don't burn that shit.
He's squatting.
Alright.
shit on
Alright. So Johnson doesn't get kicked out by 1 vote, right? The Senate votes to keep him in office by 1 vote. But essentially he's lost all political capital. He doesn't have any power, right? The Congress can't override any veto. He's lost all credibility, Okay, and so he, for the last year of office, right, he's just there. He's just there. Yes.
Why did they want him out if they could override everything he said?
I think they want him out because even if they can override him, right? You know, just the fact that you have to go through that process, right? And the fact that you have to constantly have these political battles, you know. I think just for coincidence, right? Not coincidence, convenience, excuse me. And maybe efficiency, right? Just to be able to streamline everything. Instead of going back, you know, through these houses of Congress, getting that two-thirds votes and whatnot. Johnson's going to be the first president that's impeached. Clinton got impeached in '98 for perjury, all right? But neither president got kicked out, all right? Nixon would have been impeached during Watergate. You're going to hear about that in American too. He would have been impeached. They started those procedures, and then he resigned before they actually followed through with it. So he never got impeached. All right, so the second thing we need to remember here, Johnson's impeached.
That was on the door when I walked in.
I didn't see it. All right. We're fast forward, like going to the next year. Johnson's not going to run for re-election. Ulysses S. Grant, he's going to run for the Republicans. All right, in 1868. All right. Ulysses S. Grant and the Republicans, they do a couple things here. Number one, they like to remind people of Grant's contribution during the Civil War. It's called waving the bloody shirt. Remember all this stuff that we did for the Civil War, the Civil War general and all that stuff? So the Republicans get a lot of votes from veterans. The second thing that the Republicans noticed here in the 1868 election that allows Ulysses S. Grant to win is they got a large number of African American votes as well, especially in the South, right? You think about somewhere like along the lines of 500,000 African American males voted for Ulysses S. Grant. Now remember, all right, during this process here, these southern states are, fulfilling these requirements with the 14th Amendment, right? Federal troops are leaving, right? And Democrats are being voted into these southern states, right? And because knowing that African American males will probably vote for their party, they have to do something to try to ensure that black males will be able to vote. This is where the 15th Amendment will come in. 15th Amendment grants African American males the right to vote. Why do they do this? We would like to think that the Republicans have, the idea of equality, right? Being able to vote and participate in this democracy. You'd like to think that would be their number one motivation. It's not, right? It's not. They're really trying to do it to make sure that they can be voted into office, right? And it's the same thing, and you have to think, right? And this will make sense a little bit more when why does Reconstruction end? These radical Republicans, do they truly believe in equality? Do they truly want to help out African Americans? I think some of them probably say yes, right?
Some of them.
Or are they doing this to make sure that they can have power in the South and they can limit the power of their opposition? Like, what's their primary motivation here, right? To help out people or to help out themselves? And I think you might be able to answer that question here at the end, okay? I want to come back to Congressional Reconstruction here in just a second. We're going to add one more thing here in a little bit, all right? So with Reconstruction, we have some good things that happen. We have some bad things that happen. In your quiz the other day, you decided, like, by 1866, how was Reconstruction going? Some of you guys said it was positive. Some of you guys said it was a struggle. Well, some of the successes here. Number one, Lincoln's number one goal was seen through. The Union, at the end of Reconstruction, the Union is brought back together. The country is restored. Was it pretty? No. Is it perfect? No. Were there some problems with it? Of course, right? But at the end of the day, the Union is restored. Lincoln's goal was seen through. I think that could be chalked up as a success. How valuable is that when you're talking about the legacy of Reconstruction? Well, that's up to you to decide, right? Is this a big achievement, or is this overshadowed by some other things that happened? As an historian, it's up to you to place importance on things. I think the fact that you see the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments passed is a considerable success for Reconstruction. Our country finally gets rid of slavery, right? 13th Amendment. Our country grants people that were born in this country or went through the naturalization process, you granted them citizenship status and equal protection of the law, the 14th Amendment. And the 15th Amendment, you're giving the vote to males, all males, right? Women, I'm sorry, you still got another 52 years for the nation, all right? There's going to be states that allow you to vote, but for the nation, you got another 52 years. Have you realized that women haven't been able to vote? They've only been able to vote for 97 years in our country. That's amazing, right? We've been around for so long, they've been able to vote for 97 years, not even 100 years. All right, but I think this is one more time.
2020, about 100 years.
1920, it was ratified.
I use my fingers.
We're good? All right. All right, so the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments passed. That's pretty successful. All right. I think the fact that higher education for African Americans started to exist is the success of Reconstruction. You know, if you're looking at the status of African Americans or freedmen, right? You'll see them. I call them African Americans. You call them freedmen. You're going to see it both ways, right? During this time period, you might see it called this group called freedmen because the former slaves, right? So freedmen, same group as African Americans. But as slaves, they weren't able to read or write because it was illegal to teach them. All right. But after the Civil War, during this time period of Reconstruction, you see, and this was in the lectures before, you see like over $1 million pumped in and invested into education. And if you look at the literacy rates of people, right, during this time period, it skyrockets. I think that's a considerable achievement to go from slaves to not know how to read and write and to have universities and places of higher education. If you look at these, what we call HBCUs, right? Shaw, St. Aug's, right, Fayetteville State. If you look at when they were established, right, they're established during the time period of Reconstruction. A lot of them were. Right? It's not a coincidence, right? Where are the priorities here for these freedmen, right? Education is going to be a big priority. In the South, Caitlin, we're good? We're good? All right.
I was asking her something about the minute.
Public works in the South. I think that's a considerable success. Before, you didn't see an emphasis on spending on bridges, roads, all right, transportation networks. That wasn't a point of emphasis for Southerners and for Southern governments.
What's that
last
word?
Public works in the South. Public education, right? Public education did not exist in the South prior to the Reconstruction. It existed up north with Horace Mann, right? But in the South, you either studied abroad, you went up north, or you had a private tutor. After Reconstruction, we see public education. Now, this is interesting, right? As far as the legacy of knowing your history, right? So every time we come to a budget discussion here at the state level, right? Democrats or Republicans, it doesn't really matter, all right? If you look at where education lies as far as budget priorities, until very recently, it's always been close to the bottom. It doesn't matter who's in power. It's always been close to the bottom. I think that's this is a tradition that the Southerners have always had, right? Public education has never been a priority in the South. Doesn't matter if you're liberal, conservative. It's just there's other things that you place on above it. But if you look in the Midwest or you look up in the north, right? They have crappy roads, right? But they have strong systems of public education. Now, why? If you think about this. All right. Why would Southerners not have a strong tradition of supporting public education? Well, who are they going to educate? Poor whites, right? And former slaves. Why would you want to educate two groups of people that are going to challenge your status in society, right? If you're a plantation owner, right? If you're somebody up there at the top of the pyramid, why would you give opportunities to people that might change the status quo, right? So poor whites and African Americans suffer from this, these levels of priority here that people place on public education. And it's still around today. Some other successes here. What other success? Oh, yeah. Political activity or political participation from African Americans. Once again, you look at from 1865. 1865, African Americans are slaves in the South, right? Don't know how to read and write. Then, as you start to see Reconstruction go through, right? You see African Americans not only voting, but they're participating in holding political office at the city level, the state level, and the national level. That's a considerable achievement in that short time period, right? to go from the status of society where you're at, all right, and not only being able to participate by voting, but by participate by holding office, all right, I think that's a considerable achievement and success for Reconstruction. Now, do they hold the majorities? No, right? Even though they might be a majority in some states, the only majority that African Americans have, all right, in any form or level of government would be in South Carolina. In South Carolina, for a short time, they held a majority in the lower house of the South Carolina state legislature. You have the first African American senator here in Rebels, all right, elected into office during this time period. So once again, I think considerable success is here. Now, when you're looking at it, and you should be able to answer this question at the end of the class today, right? Was Reconstruction more of a success or a failure? Or what was the legacy of Reconstruction? It's up to you, right? When you're looking at each one, it's not how many, right? It's not how many we have. It's not like, well, they had 5 things that worked well and 4 things that didn't work so well, right? So it's more of a success. That's not always the case, right? You got to weigh them out, right? Which ones do you feel like are more important? So what are the failures? All right. Well, I think the first failure were the black codes. All right. That happened during presidential Reconstruction. They're going to be taken away when Congress gets into control. All right. But they existed for 2 years. These laws that the southern states had during presidential Reconstruction that placed restrictions on African Americans. You know, they couldn't travel without permission. You can't testify against a white. You can't serve on a jury. You can't carry a weapon. You can't intermarry. Right. I think that would be a failure. I think the rise of the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, that's going to be a failure. Or shows, right? It's an example of Reconstruction not really fully succeeded. Happens in 1868, right? Using violence and intimidation to try to keep African Americans from voting, right? Or engaging in political activity. Now, this is when I said I was going to come back here, right? So what does Congress do about this? Right, they're in control of Reconstruction right now. They see that the KKK is becoming a problem, right? It's keeping African Americans from being able to vote. What do? They pass 2 laws, the Enforcement Acts. This is in 1870 and 71. The Enforcement Acts allow Congress to use the Army. All right, you can send federal troops down to supervise the elections. All right, so to make sure that everything's on the up and up, these Enforcement Acts will allow federal supervision of elections. Bring the Army down there. They're not going to be enforced, and later the Supreme Court will rule them unconstitutional. This is similar to the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that you'll learn about in American 2. Not the Army necessarily, but allowing somebody to supervise, right? Allowing the federal government to supervise elections in the South, all right? That was put into place in 1965, and it was recently taken back out. All right, what are the failures here? Oh, yeah. KKK, black codes. Oh. Sharecropping. And tenant farming. This is the failure on 2 different levels. First, shows that the South isn't trying to change. You know, you relied on cotton. That economy that's based on one crop, right, proved to be disastrous when you were trying to fight a war. You need to have that diversified economy. That's one of the advantages that the North had. One of the things that allowed the North to win is that diverse economy, that economy based on industry and manufacturing. What you see happening in the South after the Civil War is you see some attempts to industrialize, right? Some attempts to bring factories down south. A lot of them are going to be textile mills. But the South is still going to rely on this system of agriculture and labor. Sharecropping and tenant farming, we talked about this back there in the notes. Sharecropping is you don't have any skills, you're living in the South, right? Well, I'll allow you to use my land, right? I'll actually provide you with supplies, seeds, right? Anything. And at the very end, when you're about to harvest your crop, you have to give me a share, right? You have to give me about 50% of your crop, all right? And then you're going to have to pay me back for any supplies that I loaned you. Why is this a failure? Well, because you never, well, I shouldn't say you never. Oftentimes, you're not able to pay them back entirely, right? So you're still in debt. So Mela, you're still in debt to me. You weren't able to pay back everything. Well, guess what? I'll let you go and farm my land the next year. Same agreement. Well, Mela can't pay me back next year, and actually a debt grows. Okay, well, you know what? I'm going to let you continue to work for me, right? And it's a system of economic slavery, essentially, right? Because now you're entirely indebted to the same person year after year after year. And a lot of times you will see that these former slaves, these freedmen, go back to the same plantations that they worked on as slaves, but now they're sharecroppers, all right? And you can go to a plantation in, it's right by Durham and Oxford. It's called Stagville, all right? And you're looking at these houses, right? And there were people living on this land, all right, growing these crops until the 1950s. And the houses that they lived in were former slave quarters, right? And so you think about, like, all right, so we're trying to move forward as a country. We're trying to progress the South a little bit, leave like the pre-Civil War time period behind. But you got the same people working for the same people on the same land, doing the same thing, and living in the same house. And then their family is going to pick up the same thing, and it's going to be generation after generation. Sharecroppings also affect poor whites, all right? Because you're in the same situation, right? You don't have many skills, right? So on and so forth. Tenant farming is a little bit better. You rent the land out, right? You provide your own materials and supplies, right? And you just pay them for rent, like you're a tenant. You're a tenant in an apartment. You're a tenant, renting out this land. Okay. We got any questions here?
Why is that a failure?
Well, it's a failure for two different reasons, all right? Number one, it doesn't show that the South is moving forward economically, right?
Tenant farming.
Oh, tenant farming, I place it in there because it's just in the same vein as sharecropping. You're going to be a little bit better here, right? You're a little bit better off, and you have a chance, right? Because you don't have to give up anything. You just have to pay for that rent, right? You have a chance to eventually, improve, buy your own land, right? Start your own life. So it's a little bit better, right? But usually you'll see these two combined, right, and put together mentioned in the same sentence or the same paragraph. So I just place them together, right? Sharecropping, definitely that cycle of poverty. Tenant farming is a way out, all right, or the greater way out. Yeah.
You know, go back over that top left one.
Yeah. So congressional reconstruction, radical reconstruction, military reconstruction, right? The radical Republicans are in control of it. What is this, right? Well, the Congress splits up the South into 5 military districts. You have to ensure that African Americans can participate, right, in politics. You have to write a state constitution, and in that state constitution, you have to include the 14th Amendment, all right? Once that's done, the troops will leave, right, and you're a state again. You have representation like you used to, right? Everything goes back to normal, all right? And by 1875, 8 out of 11 have done that. Any other questions here? Three?
Did they do that successfully, or they have?
We'll talk about that here at the end of Reconstruction. Any other questions? Angela, if you're watching, we're going to pick back up after lunch, okay?